Brave multiplies brave. First, let me thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story. My story involves a lot of trauma, and trauma comes in many different forms. Trauma can be the loss of a parent due to divorce or incarceration. Trauma can be a string of negative and hostile interactions with people who are supposed to serve and protect you. Trauma can be going to bed hungry every night. Trauma can also be being violated emotionally, physically, or sexually. These are all examples of some of the traumas that I faced as a child. My relationship with trauma started before I was born. It started when my father would hit my mother and even pulled the gun on her on several occasions. My sister, who was 4 years older than me, witnessed many of these events. The ripple effect of these incidents was a household that would use violence and verbal abuse as a common form of communication. Because of my trauma, I started to consider suicide at the age of 8 years old. Because of my experiences, I withdrew from school and I ran away from home on multiple occasions. Eventually, I dropped out of high school at 15. As time went on, I didn't trust anyone. I lived in constant fear. I never spoke about my trauma until I was 32 years old, when I finally opened up to my girlfriend. When I first talked to my girlfriend about my childhood trauma, she cringed. I know that she didn't mean to, but when I went into the details of my experiences, she just couldn't help it. My trauma took an emotional toll on her and even created a strain on our relationship. I was always scared to speak out about my experiences because I felt like people would view me differently. Eventually, I realized that I viewed myself differently and I was projecting those feelings onto others. My therapist was able to help me look inward, and I was able to understand how my trauma was guiding my decisions. When I was younger, I would use anger to create a shield so that no one could hurt me or figure out what was wrong with me. But as I got older, the anger evolved into depression, anxiety, insecurity. I would use drugs, alcohol, and risky behavior as unhealthy coping mechanisms. My decisions were an attempt to gain control and establish my masculinity. I tried to sleep with as many women as possible and love them so passionately that all the pain would go away and nobody would know my secret. As for the pain, I decided to do drugs, a lot of drugs. I also drank because these things had a way of numbing the pain every time I looked in the mirror. Eventually, I was able to accept my trauma as a part of me, and I started to work on rebuilding my spirit and my self-esteem. I learned to be kind to myself, to forgive the little kid in me that was taken advantage of. One of the most impactful moments came when I told my therapist that I didn't believe that I could accomplish the things that I dreamed about. Then my therapist told me that he believed in me. It scared me to hear these words, but I believed him. And eventually, I started to believe in myself. Those were words that had never been told to me before, a level of encouragement that I had never received from my mother or my father. For much of my life, I struggled with the idea of my masculinity. I never wanted to admit to my boys that I was the kid that got touched, let alone the more perverse details of my trauma. The fact is that boys who have never been molested always believe that it could never happen to them. Growing up, I remember the topic would come up, and boys would always say something like, "Man, I would have fucked him up. I would have killed someone if they did that to me." And they never really realized that it was probably going to be someone really close to them, someone that they trusted and loved, someone who would make them feel safe, someone who was heavily invested in their family dynamic. I just always remember nodding along and saying, "Yeah, me too," or it couldn't be me, and hoping that my response was convincing enough to avoid any more involvement in these conversations. One of the biggest tests in my mental health journey was sharing my story with my male friends. I was always scared of how they would view me afterward. Could they still see me as a man in their eyes? Would they still respect me? Would they look at me any differently? And finally, I decided that I was tired of carrying these demons around. I decided that I would start off by telling a very close friend of mine, someone who I've known since first grade. In fact, one time when I was a kid, I was about to get jumped by some older boys in my neighborhood, and he stepped in to help me out. We both got our asses kicked, but at least I wasn't alone. To me, my boy was fearless, and I really did feel like he wouldn't judge me. As I told him some of the details of my experience, he started to cry. And I said, bro, it's all good, man. I'm working with a therapist. I'm getting better. Like, you don't have to worry about me. And then I realized as the tears were running down his face, those tears weren't for me. He responded softly by telling me that when he was a child, he had witnessed his mother get raped by his father. He told me that he had never shared that story with anyone. I felt honored that he felt comfortable enough to share that with me. In that moment, I witnessed the power of sharing, because brave truly multiplies brave. My trauma left scars that only I can see, but through sharing my experiences and my struggles with my mental health, I was able to turn a lifelong friend into my brother. I realized that my fear were shackles, and that by sharing my fears, I had freed myself and inspired my brother to do the same. Human beings are capable of achieving beautiful heights of resilience, but in order to demonstrate resilience, we must first experience difficulties. So if you feel like you're tired or if you want to give up, please consider asking for help. You are not alone. More so, once you embark on this journey to seek help, you will inevitably inspire others to do the same. To anyone who's listening, I just want to tell you that I believe in you. I believe in your dreams. And to anyone who is still listening, I want you to know that you are loved. My name is David Andrade, and this is My Brave.